Welcome to my guide on learning intermediate and advanced level play for Granblue Fantasy vs. Rising. The goal for this video is going to be an in-depth guide on some common option interactions in Granblue Fantasy vs. I'm also going to be including an explanation on decision-making growth needed for advancing in fighting games, so the goal will be to get anyone from a beginner intermediate level to the level above because of a better understanding on how options work. Okay, so I'm going to start a quick little talk about how difficulty works in Granblue Fantasy vs. Rising. The technical difficulty floor of Granblue is very, very low, but there is a pretty high knowledge ceiling that goes along with that, which is present in a lot of fighting games, but it becomes the main difficulty factor in a game like Granblue. Granblue Fantasy vs. Rising is a pretty mechanically intensive game, not the most, but it is a very big contribution to the difficulty that goes along with this game and is very necessary to understand the mechanics in order to progress and get better. So starting out, realizing what your options are in RPS helps you map out what your overall game situations are and develop a knowledge of the mental stack in the game for your character. So when you first start out learning your options, you can think of them as rock, paper, scissors options, mostly having hard counters to each other. But as your knowledge of the game progresses is when you start realizing what the mental stack is, and you can think of it as an upgrade or evolution from rock, paper, scissors to owning a deck of cards. Knowing character's deck of cards and being able to understand your deck of cards and what beats what in multiple situations is what gives you a higher level of play in fighting games, and it's very necessary for learning. After building an understanding of the mental stack, you need to build an understanding of different factors that affect play, such as characters, range, health, resources. The accessibility to certain tools change a lot of your options and the priority of things in the mental stack. And the first thing that we'll be getting into for this guide will be the understanding of mix-ups around baiting throws. So one of the first things I wanted to talk about was throw baiting in this game. Throws are very high risk in a way, but they're also very useful because they're very fast. They go through block, and you need to use a throw to take a damageless tech. But as you can see, there's a lot of risk associated with it because it has a very long whiff animation to it. Very necessary to use in this game, but they do lose to a lot of things, and we're going to go over that. The things they lose to are meaties or a strike, stagger pressure, dashbacks, a well-spaced run up and walk back, run up and jump. They also lose to run up and then using a throw bait move. There's a lot of throw bait moves across the cast. You can think of Sori's ultimate rock smash where he jumps into the air, Zeta doing a TK or jump and then lunge in the air, or Six doing his ultimate wall cling and punishing throw. They all put the character into the air, and it's very worthwhile to learn what your characters are because in a lot of cases, these are very, very useful tools since throw is such a really good panic option. So definitely look over some VODs, see how people are using these moves to bait throws, understand the throw game, and you can exploit a lot of players that aren't thinking about it nearly as much. Next thing I want to talk about is delayed 5L as sort of a panic option as well as being a throw tech option. So delayed 5L is usually an option used for being a safer version of tech and grabs. So you can see and react to them moving forward and use 5L to sort of check the grab in a way that doesn't put you in as much lag. If you're fortunate or the stagger pressure is a little too slow, you can use a delayed 5L or a mash to beat it. You can also use it to beat some options that hard beat a normal grab tech. So dashback is a very common one, but it'll lose to the delayed 5L. It keeps you very safe and actionable afterwards. And if you do it early enough, you beat them before they even backdash, because backdashes a lot of times aren't invincible, I think. But yeah, the benefit is that it's very, very safe when it gets hard baited, and it sometimes will beat the options that normally beat a regular throw tech. Some of the things that it beats situationally are run up, walk back to sort of bait a throw tech. It'll put them on guard when you hit them, so you get to run a little bit of pressure. Delayed 5L used for reactions can also beat a lot of times moves that are used for throw tech breaking as a bait, right? So Sorius is the example I'm using because he's my character, but this move would destroy me if I try to tech it normally with a grab. But when I mash, it's a lot safer, and there's a really good chance that I'll beat it. One of the things you have to be aware of is it can be baited, and it will still lose really hard to strike, and especially in cases with like counter hit 5H. 5L, delay 5L might seem like mashing, but it is still a very good option, especially when you're using delay 5L to sort of mitigate throws on reaction. The risk reward associated was a little better, but it can still be baited and unsafe in a lot of situations that are very specific. So always, you know, consider the situation that you're in and gauge that. But 5L for delay teching or mashing on stagger pressure is a good thing to consider. Next up, I wanted to talk about DP interactions in the game since it's such a integral and big part of Granblue. A little more so than some other games, DPs are very, very good in this game. So understanding what your mix-up situations are around them is a big deal. So even with DPs, there's a lot you got to consider, especially in like wake-up situations and in pressure situations. You need to consider whose DP you're dealing with, right? Grand's DP is very, very different from someone like Charlotta's or Avatar Belial's DPs. So very much consider the character and DP that you're working around. Think about the effect that being closer or farther away has when considering a DP. Not just the punish, but the options that you're threatening someone with when you're close up are much more threatening than if you are far away for the most part. So a DP is probably a little more likely, as well as less risky because when you're farther away, your DP can just miss. So consider that very, very much so when you're in different situations. So we're going to talk a little bit about what it's like dealing with DPs when you're close up to the opponent. Again, weigh the risk reward of dealing with the DP, right? If you're going to hit them with a meaty or something like that when they want to DP, how much damage are you going to do? Or what is the pressure situation that you're going to get off of a block or a hit versus the damage and turning the tides that they get from DPing you? It'll be much worse for you if the round is about to end and you didn't block that DP and you just died to it. So maybe the Oki isn't worth it. Just stuff to think about. Another thing that you need to consider very highly is whether or not you're plus on their block for when they DP. A lot of knowledgeable players know when people are plus, like very common examples are 6XL. So if you try to continue pressure or frame trap, you might just get DP'd instead. So every once in a while, you know, you always gotta discourage them from doing the DP. So the most obvious and very, very good way to punish DPs is block. But there are some things you do need to consider when blocking a DP. One is you do have to consider whose DP it's blocking. Some have very weird DPs. So considering the characters, one big example is Charlotta. She is known for having a weird to block DP depending on the distance. So if you're close enough at the end of blocking, you can punish. But if you're a little bit further away, you don't really get to punish with literally anything on block. Still, usually there is some sort of answer, still get something out of it, but you just need to be mindful of who you're playing against. You need to watch out for chip situations, kind of obviously. It also depends on the character's DP, but you know, so much for blocking it. There is risk reward attached to that, so just have a sort of piece of your brain that acknowledges that this is a situation that might happen. If you're close range, you do have to be careful with the DPs even if you are plus, because you're not at a range where it will always like whiff depending on spacing. So when you are close, be careful for DPs even on your plus frames. Actually, especially on your plus frames, because anyone knowledgeable will want to hit you there because they think this guy has plus frames, he thinks he can run pressure on me, this is where I'm going to steal my turn. And that's very, very, very big in Granblue. Using DP on minus is very common, and it's something you have to play around very often. You also need to know that blocking when you are close on a DP does have counters to it, right? They could wake up and grab you. I'm blocking there because I'm expecting the DP to come out. He can just wake up and grab me. And since I was trying to block a DP, it's not very likely that I can react in tech. And as much as it is mashing, there is a chance that if you try to block a DP, they will mash on you and it will take their turn back. So it's actually the correct option to do if you're trying to DP bait. So just understand that interaction. I think it's something that goes a little less noticed, but mashing is good in a situation like that where someone is scared of a DP. The mash will give them the opportunity to run pressure, mix-ups, or whatever, or even get themselves out of the corner. So you don't want that either. Just be aware of it. When they wake up and mash, they are taking their turn back, so they can run some pressure on you. They can run a mix-up after they've done the jab or auto combo. So be aware of that as an option. As much as it is funny to say people are mashing or complain, why would you mash on your wake up? It's not bad. It has a purpose. Another situation to be wary of is, especially in the corner, people will try and jump out of the corner if you give them a chance. So if you're sitting there trying to block a DP, you do give them the opportunity to jump over you and take the corner back. It's something to look out for, so something to be aware of. You do especially need to look out for that in corner situations. That is where it will mainly happen. People don't like to jump for no reason, especially if you've been punishing them, but out of the corner is very common because you don't want to be in the corner in any fighting game, especially not Granblue. So look out for it when you have corner pressure on them. Another option, and this depends on who you're playing against, but consider using run up jump over. This is a very good option to consider because it'll jump over a lot of the DPs that people have, but what else it does is you can jump with something like JU for Gran, right? Just a falling aerial or a falling jump normal, and it'll still let you give you a lot of plus frames on block, and it lets you reset your pressure if they don't DP. So very powerful. It is at risk of being anti-aired. Another one of the options. Jump overs will often beat a lot of the DPs, but they can be called out with a 2H or something like that from someone who's very, very reactive or looking out for it. So it is used as a check on stiffer players and also on people committed to DPing on their wake up. Even when using jumping over, you do have to be careful depending on the verticality of the DP and whether or not it's a two sides hitting thing. For the sake of covering reversals in general, there are some reversal supers, like Charlottas, that go straight up or at a weird angle, and those can still hit you. So that's another thing to weigh in. My least favorite option and probably the best one is using a safe jump. If you don't already know what a safe jump is, it's just jumping in on a timing that will catch out blockers. So you'll hit them on block, but you have enough time to block because jumping in cancels your aerial move. So you will block the DP on time. This option is extremely strong and it's very good to use almost whenever you can because they are totally owned in this situation. It's a super good option if your character has one. Most characters do. You should learn it or try and find a setup that works for it because they're extremely useful. I don't like them. They're very good. Now we're going to talk about situations you can use to play around DP, but from a little farther away, from a sort of footsies distance maybe. It's good because it makes you a lot safer to be at this distance, especially from something like a DP, but you don't have the threat of as many mix-ups. So while it is safer for you, you get less punish, and they are less likely to use a DP. So you kind of have to space things out to bait them into thinking that you're close for these options, but in reality, you actually, at the last second, made it a little farther away. One of the things you need to consider when farther away versus closer on these DP situations is that DPs beat meaties, they beat badly timed jumped over, they beat grab. So when you're not close and don't have access to your close normals anymore, then people will be a lot less likely to use a DP. That's why it's so important to try and bait the distance. But if someone is reactive or whatever, and they have an understanding on what the situation is, it's very unlikely that someone seeing you at this range will DP you. A way you can convince them, and I've talked about it a couple times, is run-ins. At least I've shown it. Run-ins make it a little convincing that you're going to be in close range. and they might not react to you walking back or dashing back. But it is very, very scary for people, especially because 6XL exists in this game. And it's a very good option. Resets your pressure and everything. So the run-ins are scary. Anytime someone sees a run-in, if they're thinking about it a little bit, it means that you might have access to your 6XL. So run-ins, whenever you can make stuff a lot more convincing and a lot more threatening. And that might bait them into DPing. So the first option I wanted to go over is run-in and dashback. It baits the DP, it baits stuff like wake up or like delay tech 5L. Very good option for getting to that distance quickly, especially if you have a high priority long distance move that you can use on them if they use a normal or something instead of a DP. So this has its little niche, but it's very strong as well. It is also very safe. Considering you're the one oaking them, you are very safe a lot of the time unless you commit to a normal on a DP. But especially at this distance, there's not much they could ever do to even take their turn back or anything like that. At the very, very worst, you're playing against the zoner and they get a short block string on you. But if you're not playing against the zoner, putting yourself at this distance is basically a reset on neutral. So good. Not very good reward unless you do bait a DP, but the risk is very, very low. Another option is running up and walking back. This lets you control the spacing that you have no matter what their wake up option is, so it is also relatively really safe. But it will lose to someone waking up and using a pretty long distance low unless you spacing trap it very well. The riskiest counter to this option is people waking up and immediately running at you with a 6XL or something. It's kind of a hard call out to make, especially since you need a good bit of knowledge for it. But it's very, very good on people's wake up, especially when moving around DPs, DP heavy players and characters. Just, use it, figure out what other things you get with it. You can use, if you space it properly, a lot of time you can use spacing traps when they try and react to you walking back and mash, or you can use timing to run back in with a 6XL. There's a lot of options that you get with just spacing out on their wake up. I wanted to add another reminder that a lot of this stuff that I'm saying works with reversal super situations as well, and supers as well, because a lot of them are invincible reversals. So a lot of the stuff can be applied. It is just think about it and remember it's matchup dependent stuff with supers, especially because they can have really weird hitboxes. Some are command grabs, so they won't actually reversal you, especially in situations where you jump or backdash. Just remember that a lot of this is applicable to supers and to weigh that in a similar way. Okay, now we're going over another really big topic, and this is very game specific, is bravery points, BP, the little gems at the top. Very big game specific. It's one of those things that add a lot to the mental stack and plays out very interestingly. But since it's a game specific mechanic, even if you are familiar with fighting games, you might not know how the options using the gems fits into the mental stack. So that's what we're going to go over now. So as a concept, remember that over time you lose this BP, and what it does is you will start taking more damage after you've lost 2 gems. And it's just a good thing to know because you need to consider the BP economy in the game. It has a very real impact on your health, on how you play the decision making. If you get hit by a DP when you have 3 BP, is a very different situation than if you get hit by a DP when you have no BP, and that will blow you up. Try and manage BP and be very conscious of it, because even if you are slightly playing better than the opponent, that BP can make it so that you just lose the game immediately. Strongly consider the BP gauge as kind of like meter, but it is much more it's a much bigger part of the economy of your round, because it will affect how much damage you end up taking. So even if you do play a lot of the game better than your opponent, you might lose out because of just a couple bad guesses when you are low on BP. So understanding the pluses, like the positives and negatives to using your options using BP, just also consider they're very strong tools that you get out of BP, but they're very strong negatives if you do not manage it properly. Now we're going to talk about Raging Strike and Raging Chain. Very important check, very big part of the mental stack that you have to keep track of. But it's a very flexible mechanic in the game, and it gives a lot of character strengths where they might not have had it otherwise. So Raging Strike is really good when you're in pressure situations as a very good reaction check. It's very hard to react to when someone is worrying about other things in the mental stack, but it is very much a reactable move otherwise. It guard crushes and opens up a small mix-up situation. The mix-up situation that comes out of it can be totally avoided if you end up using that. It's like if you press the Raging Strike input when you get Raging Striked on block, you can push them off. This comes back to the economy. That will cost you 2 bravery points, and all it costs them is 1 bravery point and 25 meter. So another time to remind you that the economy of BP is very important, and all of these interactions will play a role in that economy. There's a very clear answer to, like, a 100% counter to this mechanic is spot dodging, obviously. You get to blow them up for it and everything too. So, but it is a very hard to react to check, and it beats guard. So if someone is using this quite a bit, you need to be ready to react to it next time. Otherwise, it'll be too fast and you'll lose the round immediately from that sort of economical play that you have to mind. And as you can see, even if you do reversal them right there, it is a big blow to your economy. You lose 2 BP. So spot dodging when you can, but it's probably not going to be too often, at least not the first time. If they use it too often, you definitely got to spot dodge that. But it makes a huge difference spot dodging. You get a big punish. They wasted a BP. It's great. Another thing you can do to kind of beat it most of the time is mash. It is very much a check, so you have to be sitting there blocking to get beat by it. It is just scary, and I'll go over that in a sec. So depending on spacing, if you do mash, if you use a button that's not the correct button for the situation, which is usually pretty often, especially if this is a panic mash, you might just get spacing trap. And that sucks too. It's something to be aware of. It's spacing dependent, and a lot of characters have good spacing traps. Big one that comes to mind is Luane when he has slide kick and then uses his Raging Strike. So these sort of spacing traps are common. They will happen a lot. So either you pick the right button to mash with, spot dodge, or don't mash and take the hit 2 economy instead. Depending on space and timing, you could lose or win with a jump. So main points are, watch out for Raging Strike because its economy is its use for round economy is very important. It helps you do a lot of damage. It's a tool that lets you convert into damage off of very easy hits or very quick hits that usually you wouldn't get the damage from anyways. But its weakness is that it's very slow, it's reactable, and it can be a liability when you're trying to use the other mechanic that we're going to get into right now. Another mechanic I need to go over is Dead Angle, or the Get Off Me tool with using BP. It is very strong. You do it from block. It's plus on block, so they have to hard bait it for you to get punished for it. Looks like this. It's very good. Lets you take your turn back at the cost of 1 BP. There's not much mix-up attached to it. There is only one way that it can really lose, but even then, this is an incredibly strong tool, and one that you should definitely consider using anytime you have more than 2 BP. So when you consider using BP, you need to consider what your situation is in the game. If you need another lease on life, if you're in the corner like this and you need to get out, then BP is really good because it lets you get in on a sort of counter hit, lets you get in. And I think even when it's not counter hit, if they're walking forward or anything like that, it does give you plenty of time to run over, do a safe jump, stuff like that. It's very strong. You need to consider it, and you need to consider what situation you're in when you use it. If you're just in the middle of the screen, you might not get as much mileage out of a reversal like that. But if you're in the corner, in a very scary situation, you should not mind using this BP. It's a small hit to the economy, and it's just worth so much to be able to play neutral again instead of being in the corner. So I wanted to talk about the only like big counter to this would be spot dodging when you're on offense. So the defender will try and dead angle you, but if you use a move that's plus enough or recovers quickly, you can cancel into a spot dodge. Things like jabs work well too, because jabs can be canceled into spot dodge. So anything that's fast enough, low recovery enough, or cancels, you can probably use to bait these. And the most common situation will be on jump-ins. People will see jump-ins and they'll think, this is a very risky, this is very risky to block because they get a lot of pressure out of it. They get a mix-up. They could possibly tick throw you as well. So when a lot of people see this, they don't want to deal with it and they'll dead angle. And what will happen is, if you know, you can spot dodge it, and it'll let you punish in a lot of cases. But the biggest thing is you're not totally owned, right? You don't get safe jumped on. You don't, a lot of times you won't lose corner pressure because of it. The very worst that will happen is you're in an awkward situation where you and them are close and you kind of have to guess what one or the other is going to do. But that's the hard bait for it right there, is doing that spot dodge after a cancelable move or a jump in. Very, very common on jump ins. So if someone is very happy to use these dead angles or these reversals, try and bait it with a jump in. It's your best bet at baiting it, and they will feel very, very dumb for using one of the most broken mechanics in the game and still losing. So add that to the deck. I'm now going over another really big mechanic in the game. It's a little simpler to understand. It is just a very widely applicable mechanic. It's 6-6Ls. These things, these are stupid. We all thought they were pretty stupid on launch of the game, but they definitely have counterplay, and what's important is that they add a lot to the mental stack. They add a lot to worry about, but the answers are pretty clean and clear in a lot of situations, especially when you're closer. It's just that not everyone knows them because it's very closely tied to how frame data works. So how would you deal with a 6XL approach, right? It's a really big move, it's forward moving, it's fast, and it's plus. The best thing you can do is try and stuff it. You see them move forward, you see them twitch forward, and you're expecting a 6XL, because it's a very common move to see at this sort of footsies range. Stuff it. If you don't want to worry about it, stuff it. As long as you're using moves that have a higher priority than 6XL, then you should be fine, because 6XLs are big and they are fast, but the thing is that they're throwing their body at you in most cases. So be ready to stuff it. If you think that they're spamming it, spam some good neutral tools instead, and you can stuff them out and not get their pressure started. And now we're going to talk about the slightly more involved part, is 6XL pressure, like what happens after they've gotten a 6XL on you. A very common option is 6XL into 6XL, but you need to understand why people do this. So 6XL is plus, right? Getting hit by that first 6XL, a lot of people will recognize, oh, that's plus, and they'll block whatever comes next, right? Lest they get frame trap. But that gives them time to 6XL again. Why would you just do the same move twice? Won't you be in the same situation as before? Not quite. There are really big benefits to doing a second one. First of all is, if you do a second one, people might not have reacted to the first one and stuffed it. But once people see you do two, they might assume this person is spamming the 6XL, right? After 2 reps, a frame trap is usually going to come next. It's very common. A lot of people use that. It's a very primal thing. You see 2 6XLs and you're like, I want to mash now. They have been resetting their pressure I want to take my turn back. So that's a reason. It's sort of the mind game to it. Another reason why people might want to do 6XL into 6XL again is it might put them closer to you, which makes a lot of options more threatening. What they can do is do 6XL into another one, and they'll be close enough to do a very hard to react to grab, right? Another option they have access to is if they do it right, and this depends on characters. On characters like Stories, who I play, this becomes very easy, but on Gran, it's a little harder, is getting access to your close moves. Because close moves are very dangerous in this game to be blocking. They have way better frame data, and they give you access to a lot of really good stagger pressure. So, and they also give you access to your auto combos as well. So you get mix-ups out of that too. That is another reason why 6XL into 6XL is actually something that works. Understand that it is very potent. It is very strong. It is very strong because it gives you access to good moves, and it is very strong because it is a mind game that is very easy to fall for if you're not thinking hard about it. Beating 6XL into 6XL is actually very simple. All it really takes is mashing, right? If they're trying to reset their pressure into 6XL again, which is common, if you mash a fast button, they won't have the time to. They don't have the frame data to do that. So, you know, be wary. Understand that that is the answer to them trying to reset with another 6XL. It's kind of like stuffing it. You kind of have to mash on it because they're throwing their whole body at you. The mash will work if they're trying to do another 6XL. So if you're mashing on the 6XL and they kind of see it coming, the other very easy option is this is +2. What if I mash on you, right? 6XL and then mash with a lot of buttons will beat out your mash. So now we have kind of most of the pieces to the puzzle. We understand that to beat 6XL isolated, you gotta mash to beat out another 6XL coming out. But they might not do another 6XL. They might frame trap you instead. And that's a very scary situation to be in. But understand, it's a mash or no mash situation. Except for when they're close enough to grab you. Then it becomes a little more complicated. But the main sort of rock, paper, scissors situation is whether or not someone's going to 6XL more than once, or they're going to frame trap you. That is what most of the mix-up there stems off of. Like everything else, consider the character. Characters with strong 6XLs have very strong control of neutral and very good access to that frame data check RPS. But weigh the character, weigh the player. Some players like to go for the frame trap because it's a lot safer. That's the good thing about it. Getting a second 6XL in might get you counter hit. And that's the sort of risk reward to both options. Not too much to say on 6XL since its answers are a little easier to understand when it's on paper. But it's definitely knowledge you need to arm yourself with, is dealing with 6XLs. It's extremely important. And so as a last note, I do want to add, it is a lot to take in. Fighting games are hard. There's quite a bit of studying that goes around to it, but this is for people trying to get to the next level. I think that this is part of what I had to understand before getting decent myself. Was thinking a lot about games, thinking about how the minutia of these interactions work, and mostly the getting good part, right? You need to be able to think for yourself. I kind of gave a lot of answers here, but what the main goal of this video is to sort of get the gears turning and get you thinking critically. If you're not already very strong at fighting games, this should help develop your mental toolkit that you need to learn fighting games on your own. Think about what your RPS is, and once you've developed enough RPS situations in your toolkit, you can start to think of what is the mental stack, and then you start getting a greater scope on fighting games. Learning becomes a lot easier. You can transfer from fighting game to fighting game a lot easier. It's awesome. It feels good. It feels good to get better, and it feels good to move on to the next level. Thank you everyone so much for watching. Really appreciate it. Go out and win more.